It all started in the spring of 2014. I was 26, Sandra was 27. We'd been together for 5 years, married for 2. We met back in college. She was studying accounting, I was knee-deep in mechanical engineering. Our first meeting happened at a hazy fraternity party thrown by a mutual friend. We clicked over cheap sangria and hilariously bad dance music, the kind that makes you laugh even as you're moving to it. From that very first exchange, something electric passed between us. Sandra was stunning in this cool, composed way, long dark hair always tied into a sleek ponytail, eyes so piercing it felt like she was reading your soul. She spoke with a calm authority that made everyone lean in a little closer, like they were hoping to earn her approval. I was no exception. I was tall, headstrong, chasing ambition like it was the only thing that mattered. People said I looked older than I was, probably because I carried the weight of my goals in every glance. Despite our differences, we fit. Fast. Within a year, we were planning a wedding. To me, Sandra was everything. Sharp, self-assured, the kind of partner who didn't just support you but pushed you to be better. She wanted a stable life. I swore I'd give her that, whatever it took. But marriage doesn't just bind two people. It ties together two entire histories. That's where her mother, Isabella, came in, an iron gate draped in pearls and disapproval. From the first time we met, she made it crystal clear I wasn't good enough. I was the stray mutt her daughter foolishly took in. I did everything to win her over. Flowers, help around the house, polite conversation, but she never thought. At our first dinner together, she gave me this frosty glare, turned to Sandra, and said, "My dear, you deserve someone far more refined." That was it. One sentence, and I was dismissed. That was her real greeting. In her eyes, I wasn't the polished man her daughter, an accounting major destined for success, should have chosen. Still, I married Sandra, and it felt like I'd won something. Her father, Marco, was the quiet type, too quiet, always lurking in Isabella's shadow. He'd mutter a few niceties here and there, but never really engaged. I always figured he stayed silent to avoid stepping into her line of fire. Sandra had an older sister, Serena. She seemed softer, more delicate. Everyone knew she was battling infertility, and though she never spoke about it openly, the sadness clung to her like a second skin. Her husband, Arnold, was easier to talk to. We weren't best friends, but we shared laughs, small talk, sports. It was simple. Sandra and I had agreed. No kids for a while. We wanted to travel, crush our careers, pay off the house. Plenty of time for babies, she'd say, flipping her hair with that signature, almost smug confidence. I always nodded, partly because I truly supported her, but also because the freedom suited me. I had dreams of my own, and children weren't part of the immediate plan. But then, everything changed. A year into our marriage, Isabella fell. Just a minor accident, but enough to land her in the hospital for a couple of days. Doctors recommended bed rest, and Sandra went into overdrive. If there was one person who could puppeteer Sandra's thoughts, it was her mother. Isabella had spent years drilling into her daughters that a woman's worth was measured by the family she built and the grandchildren she produced. Sandra camped out at the hospital, barely leaving Isabella's side. I visited with flowers, hoping for some civility, but Isabella just sneered. "Don't you have better things to do?" she'd snap. Or, "Doesn't your firm keep you busy?" Every visit was another jab. My career, my time, my very presence. Once she got home, the pressure ramped up. Isabella cranked the guilt to new levels, lamenting the absence of grandchildren like it was a personal tragedy. Then came her and Marco's 30th anniversary, a grand family event. Everyone dressed to impress, seated around white linen tables under crystal chandeliers. But even with all the glitter, I sensed it. Something heavy was coming. Isabella, never one to shy from spectacle, grabbed the microphone. With practiced sorrow, she spoke about her fragile health and her haunting fear of never becoming a grandmother. That was the cue. Serena broke down in tears, confessing to the entire room that after countless visits to fertility clinics, she still couldn't conceive. Her voice cracked, and all the pain she'd kept hidden poured out. Arnold stood behind her, stiff and silent, lips pressed into a thin, helpless line. And Isabella, queen of dramatics, moaned through tears, "I just want grandchildren." Serena tried. "But maybe this family will never have a child in its bloodline. If Sandra waited too long, I might not be around anymore." Isabella's eyes slid toward me, sharp with accusation, as if I alone stood between her and a grandchild. And just like that, the tension, long dormant, began to bloom. On the drive home, Sandra stared out the window, her voice fragile. I can't stop picturing my mom in that hospital bed. What if she never gets to hold a grandchild? What if Serena never? Her words faltered, swallowed by the glow of passing streetlights. I reached over, gave her hand a gentle squeeze. We've got time, I murmured. Let's not rush. But inside, my thoughts were far less certain. I liked our life as it was, free, unburdened. And I hated the idea of anyone, even Sandra, trying to push me toward fatherhood before I was truly ready. Deep down, a quiet fury had been growing in me for some time. I was thriving in my career, building a solid life with Sandra, chasing something bigger than just settling down. But the more her family brought up kids, the more that resentment festered. Quietly, bitterly, I let it grow. If Sandra, or worse, Isabella, pressed the issue, I'd feel this wild, rebellious urge to push back. My sarcasm sharpened like a blade, especially when it came to Isabella. A few months after her dramatic anniversary performance, she showed up at our home without warning. Sandra was upstairs, napping. I was sprawled on the couch, scrolling mindlessly. Without knocking, Isabella let herself in and hovered in the hallway like an inspector general. Her gaze swept the room, lip curling. How do you live in such improvised conditions? Sandra must hate this mess. I didn't look up. Maybe if you called first, I'd have had time to roll out the red carpet. I replied, voice thick with sarcasm. She narrowed her eyes. Such arrogance. I wonder how my daughter puts up with you. She wanted a fight, and truthfully, I was itching for one. I bit my tongue barely. If Sandra caught us mid-argument, I'd never hear the end of it. Eventually, Isabella stormed out with a huff. I just wanted to check on my daughter, she snapped before slamming the door. I let out a bitter chuckle, satisfied. Another round won. Time passed, and though we didn't talk about it openly, Sandra and I both knew the topic of children now loomed like an uninvited guest in our home. Occasionally, she'd mention her mom's declining health or the latest fertility treatment Serena was trying. But mostly, we tiptoed around the conversation. Then came the call that shattered the silence. It was a Saturday. I'd just gotten home from the gym when Sandra called, voice trembling. Alex, I'm at the hospital. It's Serena. A long pause. She tried to hurt herself. She's in critical condition. My breath caught. I grabbed my keys without a word and drove like the road might vanish beneath me. I never liked Serena's constant lamenting about motherhood, but I never wanted this. At the hospital, Sandra's eyes were swollen, red from crying. Isabella stood near a vending machine, arms folded, her cold gaze as unreadable as ever. Arnold paced nearby, silent, fists clenched. I went straight to Sandra. Is she going to be okay? I asked quietly. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. Physically, maybe. They're pumping her stomach. Pills. Her voice broke. She couldn't take it anymore. The pressure. The reminders. The expectations. Her eyes drifted to Isabella. Then mine did too. Isabella turned her gaze on me. Expression like ice cracking. You do realize, she hissed. If you and Sandra would just have a child, Serena wouldn't feel so alone. My chest burned. That's not how mental health works. I snapped, my voice shaking. Don't you dare put that on me. Sandra stiffened beside me, but said nothing. She never did when her mother was involved. 2 days later, Serena was discharged, still pale, still silent. Isabella summoned the entire family to her house. It was suffocating. Everyone sat stiffly, murmuring in circles, while Isabella held court like a grieving monarch. Her laments spilled out again. No grandchildren, broken hearts, dying wishes. I'd heard it all before. Finally, I cleared my throat. What about adoption? I offered. For Serena and Arnold. It could be. Adoption. Isabella snapped, the word like poison in her mouth. That's not a real grandchild. She folded her arms with finality. We're talking about our bloodline. It's not an option. My mouth curled into a sneer. That's archaic. And cruel. The room fell silent. Sandra's eyes drilled into me, furious. Serena shrank into herself, arms wrapped tight across her chest, her shame so heavy it filled every corner of the room. Arnold sat there with a look of mild annoyance, as if my suggestion was beneath him. Adoption's complicated. And expensive, he muttered, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. I didn't know it then, but that moment planted the roots of something twisted, something I never saw coming. A few weeks later, Serena and Arnold began dropping by more often. At first, it seemed casual, just family dinners, checking in. But I started catching the three of them whispering in the kitchen. Their voices dropped the second I entered the room. Sandra grew increasingly secretive, clutching her phone like it held state secrets, angling the screen away from me whenever it lit up. I asked her about it. She waved me off. It's just Serena. She's still fragile. You wouldn't understand. But something in my gut screamed otherwise. I felt the distance growing. Sandra's usual arrogance had curdled into something colder, more dismissive. Every time I questioned her, she brushed me aside like I was an obstacle, not a partner. I'd started snapping back, sometimes cruelly. Maybe if you used that fancy accounting degree, you'd see how foolish you're being. I spat once, after she refused to talk about her secret texts. Then came July 5th. I pulled into our driveway and immediately sensed something was wrong. Too many cars. Isabella's, Serena's, Arnold's, and a few others. My heart dropped. Inside, the living room was heavy with silence. Somber faces. Tension so thick it pulsed. Isabella's glare met mine like ice over fire. Sandra motioned stiffly to a seat. Alex, sit. I lowered myself slowly, masking my confusion with forced calm. What's going on? Isabella's voice sliced through the air, low and cutting. We're here to resolve the issue of grandchildren. My jaw clenched. Is that so? Well, I already said. She raised a hand, silencing me. We're not talking about adoption, or test tubes, or any of that sacrilege. I glanced around. Sandra wouldn't meet my eyes. Serena looked pale, trembling. And Arnold grinned. A sick feeling settled in my chest. Then Sandra spoke, her voice sharp and bitter. Stop acting surprised, Alex. You've been dragging your feet about having a baby, and I'm done waiting. I frowned. I never said never. I just want to do it on our terms, not your mother's. That was all Isabella needed. She leaned forward, voice calm as poison. Since Serena can't have children, and you refuse to step up, Sandra will conceive a child with Arnold. Serena will raise it as her own. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. What? I choked, looking around for any sign this was a joke. But no one laughed. Arnold leaned back with that same smug grin. It's basically a done deal, man. We're not asking for permission. Just letting you know. A fire lit inside me. I turned to Sandra. So this is it. You all plotted this behind my back, and I'm just the last to know. She crossed her arms. It's for Serena. She needs this. She almost died, remember? This baby will give her a reason to live. You're selfish, Alex. You always have been. Then Isabella chimed in, smug and righteous. You should be grateful we're including you at all. Stay or go. The baby will be from this family, with or without you. Something in me cracked. You're all insane. I warred. I lunged at Arnold, fists clenched. My punch landed hard, knocking him to the floor. Serena screamed. Sandra tried to hold me back, but I shoved her aside. The rage was unstoppable. Get out of my house. I bellowed. They fled, hurling insults as they went. Isabella's voice screeched behind her. You are an unworthy husband. My daughter deserves better. Serena sobbed. Arnold clutched his jaw, cursing under his breath. Sandra was the last to leave the living room, but only to storm into our bedroom. I followed, slamming the door behind us. You're letting them manipulate you into sleeping with your brother-in-law? I barked. That's vile. She whirled on me, eyes blazing. You have no idea what Serena's going through. And you? With your dreams and pride? You never cared about what we needed, only yourself. My mother's right. She's dying, and all you can do is whine about timelines. I snarled. No, you're blind. Spoiled. You've let that venomous woman twist your sense of right and wrong. This plan, it's monstrous. We spiraled into a shouting match. Accusations, curses, heartbreak flung like knives. Eventually, she locked herself in the bathroom, and I stormed out of the house, chest heaving, heart pounding with fury. But beneath the rage was something colder, something emptier. My wife had chosen a path so warped, so morally bankrupt, I couldn't see the woman I married anymore. The next day, I told everything to Elliot, my best friend. We sat at a quiet bistro, nursing coffees as I unloaded the full weight of that horrifying confrontation. Elliot's eyes widened, his jaw nearly unhinged. That's holy hell, Alex. Beyond messed up. You might need to leave for your own sanity. Get away from all that toxicity. I scowled into my cup. And let them think they've won? Not a chance. My thoughts turned dark, twisting through fantasies of sabotaging Arnold, of publicly humiliating Isabella. Some bitter part of me wanted revenge, to make them all pay for what they tried to do in my home. Elliot leveled a look at me. Careful, man. That rage, it'll eat you alive. When I returned that evening, Sandra was at the dining table, eyes red, hands wrapped around a mug like it was the only thing grounding her. Mom's in the hospital again, she whispered, voice hoarse. She had a dizzy spell. I folded my arms. So what? Let her drop dead. She flinched, disbelief flashing across her face. How can you say that? Because she's a manipulative harpy, I snapped. And you? You're no better for letting her talk you into this madness. Sandra stood, fury lighting up her eyes. Don't you dare speak about my mother like that. She's the only one who's ever really loved me. You? You've always been too obsessed with your job, your comfort, to care about anyone else's pain. I scoffed. Oh, sure. And you're the martyr, right? Nothing screams selfless like offering your body to your sister's husband. The slap came fast, sharp and stinging. My face burned, but I didn't flinch. For one white-hot second, I thought about striking back. Instead, I clenched my fists and held the rage in. Go ahead, I said coldly. Defend that sick plan. You're just like her. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I hate you, she hissed, and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The days that followed were a silent war. We coexisted like ghosts, avoiding each other, trading venom when we crossed paths. Then, unexpectedly, Sandra knocked on the door of my study one evening. She stepped in slowly, head bowed. I shouldn't have slapped you, she said quietly. And I'm sorry for what I said. I leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. Why the sudden remorse? She looked up, and her eyes were wet again. Serena's on suicide watch. Mom's still in the hospital, and even now, she won't stop pressuring me. Everyone's counting on me to fix it all. Her voice cracked. I feel trapped, Alex. But I can't abandon them. They're my family. I studied her. Those tired eyes, the way her chin still lifted in defiance. You feel guilty. That's obvious. But do you regret the plan? You and Arnold. She hesitated. Mom insists it's the only way. I don't know what to believe. Enough, I said, voice low. You're not a child. You can walk away. Her lip trembled. And if I do, who helps Serena? She's so fragile. This might destroy her. I looked at her for a long, aching moment. Somewhere deep inside, I still wanted to be enough for her. To be chosen over them. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was pride. Finally, I sighed. Fine. We'll talk about having a baby. Our baby. But one condition. Arnold is off the table. That plan is dead. Her eyes widened. Seriously? You'd consider it. I shrugged. If it shuts your mother up and keeps you away from that. Yes. Relief spread across her face, too quickly. And there it was again, that entitled gleam, like she'd won something. And maybe she had. Because in some dark corner of myself, I realized I wasn't offering this out of love. I was staking my claim. Keeping her body, her loyalty, under my control. That night, we slept together for the first time in days. The intimacy was hollow, driven more by desperation than desire. But we pretended. We told ourselves it meant progress. Over the next 6 months, I gave Sandra everything she asked for. A new couch? Ordered. Spa retreat? Booked. She lapped it up, smug satisfaction growing with every gift. This is exactly what I needed, she'd purr, kissing my cheek like it was a transaction. And me? I found a strange thrill in it. Yes, I bent over backward, but I held the reins. Her happiness, her mother's, her sister's, they all depended on me. I dangled the idea of fatherhood like bait, letting them believe I was almost ready, watching as they danced around my decisions. Isabella, recovering from her hospital stay, kept mostly to the shadows. But every time our paths crossed, her eyes burned with silent fury. She knew I'd derailed her little scheme with Arnold, and she hated me for it. Still, she was cunning enough to play the long game. I could feel her waiting. Serena, it seemed, had stabilized. No more tear-streaked visits or hushed conversations in my kitchen. She kept her distance, maybe leaning on therapy or medication. Whatever it was, the constant emotional ambushes had finally stopped. Then one evening, Sandra came home beaming, bags swinging from her arms like trophies. "I found the perfect place for a romantic getaway," she chirped. "Santorini. Or maybe the Maldives." She waved a glossy travel magazine in my face, her excitement radiating like sunlight. I smirked. "Didn't think you were into beaches and sunsets. I figured you were more of a city girl." She tossed her hair. "I can adapt. Besides, once we conceive, we'll be busy. We deserve this. One last escape before real responsibility kicks in." I saw the cycle for what it was, another glittering stage in the charade. She flaunted our lifestyle, my income, and dangled the idea of a child as if it were the climax to some scripted love story. I didn't laugh, though I wanted to. Instead, I doubled down. I planned a grand gesture. 2 weeks in Santorini, a private villa carved into the cliffs, ocean views, opulence at every turn. It cost a fortune, but I wanted to see her face, to watch if gratitude could still reach her, or if entitlement had fully taken its place. On February 20th, the tickets arrived. I rushed home, ready to surprise her. But the house was silent. Upstairs, I found a note on the bed. Sandra's handwriting, delicate and sharp. I read it, and everything unraveled. "Alex, you see that nothing in our relationship changes, no matter how hard we try. I love you, but I love my family too. I can't watch my sister suffer. My mother's health is fragile. They need me to provide an heir to our bloodline, one that belongs to Serena and Arnold, since she can't carry it. We've tried reasoning with you, but you'll never truly agree. That's why I'm doing this without you. I'm leaving for a month. Arnold, my parents, and we won't say where we're going. You'd only try to stop us. I have to do this for Serena. But don't worry, this doesn't change us. I'll come back when I'm pregnant, and we'll pretend nothing happened. The baby will be theirs to raise. This is final, and I know you love me enough to understand, in time. Don't try to find me. I'm sorry." The room blurred as I read and reread those words. My stomach dropped, and a tremor built in my chest. She'd chosen them. Chosen him. Arnold. The fury came like a flood. I hurled the plane tickets across the room, watching them flutter uselessly to the floor. The grand gesture, my power play, had meant nothing. She didn't want my generosity. She wanted control. Legacy. A warped sense of duty dressed up as love. I dropped to the edge of the bed, choking on rage. The more I thought about it, the more it burned. This betrayal that turned me from partner to obstacle. An ATM with a pulse. For an hour, I sat in silence, the note crumpled in my fist. Then something cold settled in me. Clarity, sharp and final. I'd been their pawn long enough. Yes, I'd been cruel, controlling, manipulative. But this betrayal eclipsed it all. 2 days later, I made my move. I called a realtor, listed the house, sold the car, the electronics, even the furniture. I drained our joint accounts, leaving just enough to keep the lights on, barely. If Sandra thought she could return to a picture-perfect home and pick up where she left off, she'd be in for a brutal surprise. When I told Elliot my plan to leave the country, his eyebrows shot up. "Dude, are you serious?" "Absolutely," I said. "I'm done with these parasites. Let them raise their miracle baby without me. They're not seeing a cent." He exhaled hard. "All right, just promise you won't do anything stupid." I gave him a half smile. "Too late. Everything's already in motion. I quit my job this morning. Plane leaves tomorrow." The next day, I stood in the hollowed-out remains of our home. Only a lone chair and a table remained, ghosts of what used to be. I felt a grim satisfaction settle deep in my bones. Sandra would come back to ruins. I left with a duffel bag in one hand, and her forgotten phone in the other. No note. No goodbye. Just silence. By the time the plane took off, I wasn't even nervous. I was too full of anger, too numb to feel anything else. 27, armed with nothing but a mechanical engineering degree and the weight of everything I was leaving behind. Canada welcomed me with the quiet promise of anonymity, a clean slate far from the tangled wreckage of betrayal. 3 weeks into my new life in Toronto, curiosity got the better of me. I dug out Sandra's phone from the bottom of my duffel bag. It had remained powered off through the move, a silent reminder of everything I left behind. But now, in my modest, slightly musty sublet, I connected it to Wi-Fi. The flood of notifications was immediate. One thread caught my eye, a family WhatsApp group ominously titled Baby. I opened it. The most recent message was from Serena. "It's finally happened, everyone. After more than 20 attempts, We're going to have a grandchild. Attached were photos. Arnold, half naked, wearing a smug grin like he'd just conquered a kingdom. Sandra, my wife, barely dressed, hair damp with sweat, her face glowing with triumph. Then, the final image, a pregnancy test, two bright pink lines, undeniable. My stomach churned. I had always known what they were doing, but seeing that, branded it into my mind like a burn. I ground my teeth, rage humming in every inch of me. But I was thousands of miles away. No fists, no fire, just silence. I shut off the phone. Hours passed in restless pacing. That photo haunted me every time I closed my eyes. By morning, the fury had calcified into cold resolve. I had chosen exile. No turning back. Despite my degree, the best job I could find on short notice was hauling crates in a factory outside Toronto. The pay was decent. The labor was numbing. And for now, that was exactly what I needed. Then came Sunday. Sandra somehow remembered her own number and sent a text. It arrived like poison in my palm. Love, I'm home now. Everything went perfectly. I'm pregnant with Arnold's child. Please come back. I have news for you. I stared at the message for a long time. A bitter laugh escaped. Love? More texts followed. Darling, we need to talk. The accounts are empty. The cards aren't working. I need money for groceries. My laughter turned sharp, cruel. Now she needed me to fund her pregnancy with my brother-in-law's child. Not in this lifetime. The calls began. Sandra, Serena, Arnold, even Isabella. Each one blocked without hesitation. They still thought I was part of this deranged family circle. That I owed them something. That I'd play provider for a child I never wanted. With people who twisted loyalty into leverage. Then my father called. I answered, reluctantly. Alex, he said, weary. Your mother's worried. Sandra's been calling us. She says you abandoned her with no money. I clenched my jaw. Dad, stay out of it. Sandra's pregnant with her sister's husband's child. That's why I left. That's the truth. Silence. Then, carefully. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding? I cut him off. I'll send the pictures. You'll see for yourself. I did. A day later, he called back, livid. Alex, that woman is unhinged. And her mother. I can't believe they'd do that to you. You did the right thing, son. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of validation. Over the following weeks, I turned Sandra's phone on occasionally, just to watch the chaos unravel. The messages were frenzied, almost comedic in their audacity. From Isabella, you irresponsible ingrate. Sandra is wasting away from stress. If anything happens to my grandchild, it's your fault. From Serena, this doesn't have to ruin your marriage. We can be a family, Alex. Please come back. From Arnold, you can't run forever. Grow up and apologize. You owe us that much. I blocked them all. Eventually, my father came to visit. I flew him out myself. He stayed for a while, grounding me, reminding me that sanity still existed. With time, I landed a better job, one that honored my skills as a mechanical engineer. It paid well enough for a comfortable loft in Montreal. I moved again, further away, both in distance and identity. Montreal gave me space. Canada gave me reinvention. It became both refuge and battlefield, a place to rebuild who I was, far from the shadows of the life I'd burned to the ground. A few months later, I finally pulled the trigger. I filed for divorce. My lawyer, an old friend of Elliot's, listened to my story with wide eyes and a quiet shake of the head. But he agreed we had a solid case. Sandra had abandoned the marriage, disappeared to conceive a child with another man, and had the audacity to return asking for financial support. We submitted her handwritten note as evidence, alongside screenshots of the twisted messages from her family. The process was slow, tedious at times, but I stayed the course, resolute in my decision. Then came the twist. Elliot called with an update I hadn't expected. Sandra had miscarried. The baby, Arnold's child, was gone. Stress or complications, no one was certain. What followed was a complete implosion. Isabella blamed me, of course, swearing I'd cursed the family through cruelty. Serena and Sandra had a massive falling out. Apparently, even she couldn't stomach the mess anymore. Then, one afternoon, nearly a year after I left, I got a video call from an unknown number. On impulse, I answered, and there she was. Sandra. Her face filled the screen, sunken and pale. She looked older, hollow, like the years had devoured her from the inside out. Alex, she whispered, her voice fragile. Please don't hang up. I said nothing. My camera stayed off. She looked into the void of my silence and swallowed hard. I lost the baby, she said. And they had to remove my uterus. I can't ever carry a child again. Her voice cracked. I've cut ties with them. With my mother, with Arnold, with Serena. None of it was worth it. I'm so sorry. A storm of emotions surged inside me. But pity wasn't among them. If anything, it felt like justice. Cold, merciless justice. I let the silence hang heavy before I spoke. Let's keep this brief, I said, my voice even. You made your choices, Sandra. You mistook my love for compliance. You bowed to that harpy of a mother and expected me to follow like a fool. Now, you're living with the result. Tears spilled freely down her face. I know, she gasped. I was arrogant. I let them twist me. I was wrong. Can't we fix this? Could you ever? I cut her off with a laugh, sharp, cold. Forgive you? No. I hope that wretched mother of yours never sees a grandchild. She deserved nothing but scorn. And you went along with her. That shame? That's yours to carry. Sandra broke, sobbing into her hands. Alexei, enough. I snapped. I'm done. Our divorce will be finalized soon. After that, I owe you nothing. Not your body. Not your grief. Not your redemption. I paused. Let it sink in. When Isabella finally dies, I swear, I'll find her grave and piss on it. Sandra cried out, broken, animal, grief-stricken. Maybe once, long ago, that would have pierced something in me. But now, there was only stillness. My health might never recover, she said through shaking sobs. I have no one. I ended the call. Just like that. She tried calling back. I blocked her number. In late 2019, the divorce was finalized. My lawyer made sure she walked away with almost nothing, just a year's worth of alimony, court-ordered, and then she was out of my life for good. Then came the pandemic. The world locked itself away. And I, alone in my loft, had nothing but time. Time to think. To sit with the truth of who I had been. Controlling. Harsh. Cruel with words. I wielded money like a leash, lashed out at her family like it could fix the cracks in our marriage. But no matter how bitter I was, none of that excused what they did. Her betrayal was the final blow. A family that fed on manipulation, that twisted love into obligation. She became one of them. And when she did, she lost me.